My name is Miss Lizzie. I don't ever smoke the dizzy, but we can always share some ditties. It's just a cup in time. This song doesn't have to rhyme. Life's all of us, not every moment we can be feeling fine. I wanna share a moment, just a second if you will, maybe even a cup of thrill. We could share this performance. It's tea time, come sit with me.
Well, welcome guys, Miss Liz in the house, and let's hope that there's no restart tonight like we had this afternoon, but if we do, Jane knows to just keep on talking and we'll just keep the flow going. There's technology glitches all the time, so we just got to be prepared for them. This is a live show, so it is what it is, and we just got to go with the flow. Tonight, before we get started, let's get everybody over to all those platforms: Facebook, LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram, Clapper, Lemonade, Blue Sky, all of those good platforms. And check out also the podcast apps: Podbean, Listen Note, iHeartRadio, Spotify. If I haven't mentioned them, check them out. If you find an app or a podcast app that I'm not on, please let me know. Miss Liz will reach out and I'll get tea time on there as well. Also check out babyboomers.org because Miss Liz is partnered with them. And if you're looking to be on different podcasts or you're looking for a different flavor that Miss Liz doesn't bring to the table, you can check that out as well. So check out babyboomers.org. Tonight we have a returning guest, and you guys know how I love returning guests because the ice is already broken, so we get to dig a little deeper. Tonight we're not going to be talking about one book, but we're going to be talking about 4 different books, and Jane has them in the studio, so we're going to get those up and you guys can all see that as well. So let's get started with disclaimer and then a beautiful intro, and then we're going to get Jane in here and we're going to spill her tea. And tonight's tea is joyful, mindful, and grateful, but I think it's going to be a little different because that was the old tea. So let's see what the new tea brings tonight with Jane. A disclaimer for Miss Liz's Tea Time live show. Miss Liz's Tea Time is a global platform dedicating to sharing real life stories and diverse perspectives, meaningful conversations, and inspire awareness, healing, and connection. Miss Liz is going live using StreamYard. Before leaving a comment during the live broadcast, please grant StreamYard permission to display your name at streamyard.com. Please be advised that all the content brought forward during any Tea Time show is presented in good faith. However, discussions may include opinions, beliefs, and perspectives that do not necessarily represent the views of Miss Liz or the Tea Time platform. Information shared by guests is based on their own experiences and is perceived to be accurate at the given time of airing. All guests, viewers, and participants are responsible for using their own good judgment when considering any action or decision that may relate to these discussions. Some episodes may cover sensitive topics, including but not limited to trauma, abuse, grief, mental health, and other emotionally triggering subjects. Listeners' and viewers' discretion is strongly advised. Tea Time with Miss Liz is an open discussion forum designed to offer insight, inspire awareness, and create connection. It is not a substitute for professional, medical, legal, or therapeutical advice. If you require professional support, please seek assistance from qualified professionals or trusted resources in your area. If you have any questions regarding this disclaimer or the content of the discussion, you are welcome to contact me, aka Miss Liz, directly at my email at bookingmissliz@gmail.com or visit my link tree at Miss Liz's Tea Time. By choosing to participate in, comment on, or view these live shows, you acknowledge and accept this disclaimer. Your participation is entirely voluntary. Miss Liz welcomes you to join the conversation with an open heart, and if at any time you feel this platform is not right for you, I respect your wishes and decision and welcome you back whenever you are ready. Tea Time with Miss Liz is serving truth and awareness one cup at a time. Well, welcome back to Tea Time with Miss Liz, where stories become bridges between history, humanity, resilience, and truth. Today, we warmly welcome back a returning guest whose storytelling continues to bring forgotten history, powerful emotion, and unforgettable characters to life in ways that stay with readers long after the final page. Please join me in welcoming back Jane Lowe Rubin, award-winning historical fiction author and returning friend to Tea Time Table. Jane returned with her newest and boldest novel yet, Mayhem in the Mountains, the latest installment in her acclaimed Gilded City series. Set in the Catskills during the turbulent summer of 1924, this gripping novel explores a world shaped of prohibition, gangsters, bootlegging, family loyalty, survival for justice, and the rise of the Ku, Ku Klux Klan beyond the American South. Jane's storytelling beautifully blends history with humanity, reminding readers that behind every historical event and real people navigating fear, courage, love, change, and impossible choices. Today's tea time will explore the power of historical fiction, family, resilience, and survival, the hidden tensions of the 1920s America, why stories from the past still matter today, the emotional truth woven into mayhem in the mountains. Jane reminds us that history is not just dates and headlines, it is people, voices, choices, and lessons that still echo into today's present day. So grab your cup and join us for another meaningful conversation filled with storytelling, reflections, and real life tea, true experience and awareness. And let me get Jane in here and spill some tea.
Hi there. Thank you for having me.
Oh, did I lose you?
I don't know.
Oh, there you are. Here. I'm telling you, glitches on it. I'm telling you, this glitchy day. There must be a storm coming somewhere.
Yeah.
So, Jane, for my first time listeners, tell us a little bit about who Jane was as a little girl and who Jane is now.
Oh, I was kind of a loner as a little girl. I was one of the only Jewish children in a predominantly Christian community and in that public school. And I did make friends and I loved to read, but I kept to myself an awful lot as a child. And I spent a lot of time reading books. I always loved to disappear into a real good story.
And who is Jane today?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, Liz.
Oh, did you lose me? Okay. We're going to have a glitch, are we? And who are you today, Jane?
Oh, today? Today I'm a retired woman who has taken up his writing as a enormous passion project. I really never expected that it would become a 5-book series. I'm working on the 5th book now. And I have really enjoyed speaking to groups and hearing what people have to say and the questions that linger in their minds about the period of time that I write about. And my series begins in the late 1800s. And so many people in my age group are familiar with their own family stories of immigration and assimilation into American society. So my books do evoke a lot of discussion and commentary.
So, Jane, do you want to share a little bit about the book you were on last year first, and then we'll get to the Mayhem in the Mountains last because that's the one that we're here for tonight. But let's start with Over There.
With Over There?
Yeah, let's start with Over There, and then we'll go to the next. Or is Over There? Over There is not the first one, is it?
No, but I will take you to the first one on this brief journey.
Okay.
So when I was about 17 years ago, about 10 years before I retired, I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. And I have been in treatment for the last 17 years. I've never been in remission, but I have learned to live with it. What I found out, I was a healthcare executive at the time. What I found out was that I had a genetic defect. And so I became very, very curious about the people of my family in the past. And I wanted to find out how far back I could trace the defect. And eventually I did. And I started fundraising for research and so forth. But what's really interesting in the writing is that no one remembered my great-grandmother's name because she died young. And her name was Matilda. Everyone called her Tilly, but I knew only a few facts about her. And so when I retired, I thought, gee, I'd love to give her a story. And I'd love to honor women of her generation before people knew much of anything about cancer. And so I took some writing classes and I wrote the book Threadbare. And Threadbare is about Tilly's life coming to the United States as a 1-year-old in 1866, a year after the Civil War ended, and moving to a farm in Harlem, New York. Later coming down to the Lower East Side, getting married at 16, thinking that she was going to be able to finish high school, and then developing her own business in a booming new industry called the garment industry. And she takes in a fictional younger sister whose name is Hannah. And Hannah, because she has all sorts of opportunity that Tilly never had, becomes a doctor, an obstetrician, which was a brand new profession in the year 1900. And she wants to help women. She wants to provide safety around pregnancy. She works with Margaret Sanger to allow for birth control, which was illegal at that time. And she gets on a roller coaster ride big time. And I'm not going to share anything else about it because I would ruin it. But a lot of people have really, really liked In the Hands of Women. Well, by that point, my publisher said, gee, your books are doing nicely. How about another 2-book deal? So I thought, oh my goodness, I hope my health holds up, but it has. And I decided I would take the characters, the medical characters from In the Hands of Women into World War I as the medical corps workers, doctors, nurses who went to France. And I learned a lot about the immigrant story in World War I. 20% of the military was made up of new immigrants, not immigrants from the 1800s. I'm talking about people who came at the turn of the 20th century. And there's just so many fascinating facts. And actually, over Memorial Day weekend, a lot of people picked up this book, which was really nice because we should care about our military. They really make tremendous sacrifices. And I had 2 grandfathers who were both in the infantry in World War I. So that's really pretty amazing. So that Over There came out. And while it was in production, I started working on the 4th book. This book was an absolute joy to write. Over There was serious stuff, and some of it was a little gruesome, but Mayhem in the Mountains takes place in the Catskill Mountains, which later became home to very, very famous hotels that were owned and operated by minorities in the United States. The Jewish Borscht Belt, there was an Italian Catskills, there was a Greek Catskills, and they all developed their own recreational locations because the Christian world did not allow them to book rooms at their resorts. So they created an alternative. And but that almost never happened because in the 1920s, 2 factors occurred that changed the Catskills forever. The first was prohibition. That area of Upper New York is on the thoroughfare between Canada and New York City, and you could believe that how much alcohol came down that corridor. There were also gangsters who had breweries in that part of New York, including Dutch Schultz, who is a very famous gangster and is the guy on the cover. And he enters the story very early on. But the second thing that took place really was even more disruptive. And that was that the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, came up from the southern states at the end of World War I. And they were determined to push all the immigrants, people with accents, out. They really felt that they didn't belong in America. even though 20% of the army had been made up of them in World War I. They just didn't see that logic. And if it hadn't been historically for the governor of New York, who basically gave them the boot, they could, if they had chased the Jewish farmers and the Italian farmers, and so all these immigrants who were coming from New York in the 1920s, vacationing in this cooler region, if they had been chased out, we never would have ever had the Borscht Belt. So their presence in that area was really important. So as I started doing the research do you have more questions? I'm just
going. No. I'm listening to you. I do have questions, but I want you to. Okay. We're getting into the story. We're going to move.
Put a nickel in my neck, and I just talk. Anyway, so this book takes place. The characters in this story are linked to the other books, and the protagonist, Ella, is actually Tilly's granddaughter. So Tilly was my great grandmother, Threadbare. Her granddaughter from her son Julian is the protagonist of this story. And it turns out that, and this was actually based on a true family story, because there was a divorce in our family back in the late 1920s, around the Depression years. So Julian was not a particularly loving father, and he had a lot of issues that are revealed in the book, but they've spilled over onto his children, and his two children, Ella, and her brother, Robbie, decide they're going to run away the summer after she finishes high school. And they've been hearing bits and pieces about this farm that tied to their grandmother, their Bubby, which is Yiddish for grandma. And they have this, Ella in particular has this fantasy that this farm is like this beautiful safe haven. And she decides they're going to get out of the city. Dad wants them to haul ice, which was really dangerous. And Robbie's just a little kid. And she picks up and leaves with him, crosses the Hudson River on a ferry. And on her way up to the farm, she ends up crossing paths with Dutch Schultz, who she doesn't recognize. And he's the gangster. He's a real historical figure. And so he ends up taking them to the farm. And once he sees the farm and the opportunities to possibly hide his liquor there, he kind of gloms on. And so she gets up to the farm, and over the course of the book, she realizes that the farm is no heaven, and it's beautiful, and her aunt and uncle are wonderful people, but between them and the KKK who entered the story, there are some real serious threats. And like any good read, of course, there's some casualties and victims, and you know, high suspense, and in the end, a happy ending. So as I said, it was a joyous ride through the Catskills writing this book. Really fun.
Well, Jane, we have a question here, and it says, why did you choose the Catskills in 1924 as the setting?
Well, it's because that's where the farm in Harlem went. And that's tied to history. There was a family that were contemporaries of the Rothschild banking family in Europe. And they were the von Hirsches, the de Hirsch family. The de Hirsch family was quiet, not like the Rothschilds were always in the newspaper. They were like the Kardashians, the Jewish Kardashians. The de Hirsch family, they were quiet money. And they were very concerned about the plight of the Jews in Europe way back in the 1800s. And so they set up a farming foundation where they sent farmers from Russia, Jewish farmers, to land to get land in Israel, Argentina, and in New York State. And so this really happened. And so when the block of Jewish farmers left the Harlem livestock farms, they did it under the De Hirsch Foundation. And so it tied into history. It also set a stage that most people know about. Certainly, most the New York metropolitan area knows about. Probably all Jews know about it, and it's an interesting story for non-Jews to know about because there were so many parallels with the Italian families and the Greek families and so forth, and that we were all doing the same thing. We just had a different language, we had a different way to express our faith, but our actions were so similar. And so that was, this is an audience member who asked that question?
Yeah, that was an audience member that asked.
So I hope I answered your question.
Well, I have a question for you. What inspired Mayhem in the Mountain, the title and the cover? Like, how did you come about putting those together?
Oh, interesting. If for anybody who's interested in really getting to the bottom of that story, I wrote a blog that is on my author website about the evolution of the cover and how I'm really lucky that at my publisher, Level Best Books, my editor is like very collaborative with me. And so I always ask for different kinds of covers and she gives me choices and then we sharpen it from there. Like in the hands of women, you can see the vines on the outside and the medical symbol. I got that idea from Kingsolver's book, Demon Copperfield, where the book has a border with a lot of clues about what happens in the book. And I thought that that was really interesting. And so I used that theme for the first 3 books. And even in Over There, these are like the fields of poppies, like in Flanders fields, the poppies grow. And they're from the famous poem. But when I got to Mayhem, we were in the roaring 20s. And I wanted to keep a little bit of the design around the outside, but I really wanted something splashier. And she just worked with me. We went through like 4 or 5 iterations, and then an artist friend of mine did a little bit of cutting and pasting while we were down in Florida, using a manicure scissors to cut out Duke and put him on top of a different background. And within like a half hour, we came up with this from all the raw materials she had given us. And then she went back and cleaned it up and boom, we had a beautiful cover.
So the character is named Duke. Where'd you get the name Duke from?
He's a real character. No, not Duke, Dutch Schultz. Did I say Duke?
Yeah, you said Duke.
Duke
is in the next book. Oh, we're getting done.
No, there's no Duke. But it's Dutch Schultz. He's historical. A number of the characters and all the locations are historical. The pharmacy and what they served and what the soda fountains were like, it's all historical. I mean, I really love the research and I'm very detailed about it, what people ate for breakfast. A friend told me I talk too much about food in my books, but I love food. And I think it's so fascinating, the different things that people ate. And here's an interesting piece of historical trivia. And if anyone watches the History Channel, there was a series about foods that made America. And it's fascinating. But in the 20s, it was the dawn of real packaged food. It was when the Heinz company started bottling their ketchup and sauces, and they were safe to transport around the country. Potato chips were developed in Saratoga, New York, and packaged, and it was the first time people could get potato chips that weren't local and freshly fried. And so all of these foods started kind of finding their way into these soda fountains, and no one really understood how bad a lot of that food was for you because it tastes so good. And but it wasn't fresh, and it had a lot of bad ingredients. And as Ella, who's my main character, decides over the course of the story that she wants to become a nurse and go to nursing school. And as she's helping her Aunt Miriam, who went to France and over there, and Miriam's husband, Eli, who was in France and at their clinic, she starts seeing people with high blood pressure. And there was no medication for high blood pressure in the 1920s. And people they didn't live very long. And most of them couldn't change their eating and some of the contributing factors. But she's sitting at the soda fountain realizing that these potato chips that are so delicious have a connection to the disease. And it was really interesting to think about the people then and their, our awareness between our health and what we eat is something that has evolved over the decades, but it had to really start somewhere. And I think the introduction of packaged food probably did make a few people's eyebrows go up.
So, Jane, what got you into writing history?
What? Can you repeat that?
What got you into writing about history?
Matilda, my great grandmother. That the question in my head was, what did they do for her cancer? Because I knew that she died before my father was born in 1923 of a woman's disease. And I thought, well, gee, what kind of help was available for her back then? Not much. Not much. It was probably mostly painkillers at home. And if she had had ovarian versus breast cancer, which was a little more widely accepted as a real disease, ovarian cancer, cancer of any of the reproductive organs was looked at like a venereal disease back then. And so there was shame and confusion around it. So I really felt pretty badly. As a matter of fact, I don't know if I told you this on the last show, Threadbare, the first book in the series, I donate all of my royalties to the Ovarian Cancer Research Fund.
Yes, I remember us talking about that. We had brought it up because there was an event when you were on the last time. You were hosting an event, or your granddaughter, something to do with your granddaughter, if I remember right.
Oh, yeah. She had raised money over Thanksgiving weekend. She was early in her junior year for a bake sale, and she shook down these people who came she was outside of a bakery, and not a bakery, a bagel shop. So they had brownies and all the usual things. And she shook down these men who were going in for breakfast and ended up making over $1,000. She'd say, oh, the guy who just walked in, he put a 20 in the jar and he didn't even take anything. And so they, how competitive a lot of men are. So this thing started escalating. The next thing you know, she's like at a full jar. And it was very special to me that she had that kind of civic mindedness, that concern.
Yeah, I remember the picture you had online. You guys were at the Thanksgiving table.
I was shocked. Yeah. And it's nice at my age to see young people have that sense of caring about people in their community. It's just so important.
Well, Jamie, I have a question that just came in, and it's what parallel do you see between the 1920s and today's world?
Interesting. I could probably answer that in a lot of different ways. The 20s was when well, first let me take it the economics, and then I will answer it from a social perspective. The 20s were a very booming period economically, and there were very few checks and balances and controls on the stock market, and everybody knows that in 1929 the stock market crashed, and it was devastating for the country. But people were enjoying it so much, and they all of a sudden had money they had never had before, and they just thought it would last forever. And so they spent furiously, they did all kinds of crazy things. And I think that in our world, in our country right now, is very split between the haves and the have-nots. And the haves are on a joyride, and the have-nots are struggling. And I think that there will be another stock market reckoning, because I think that it's, there's a lot of similarities. But the impact that had on the people in the 1920s, particularly the New Yorkers, were that for the first time they could afford to send their families outside of New York in the summer. And New York just was sweltering with those apartments, no air conditioning. Some people still didn't have electricity and fans. And to be able to send your at-home wife and your children up to the Catskills to rent rooms in a farmhouse or a bungalow in the 1920s was like an amazingly fabulous thing to do. And the men would come up for the weekend, and it was a few hours of driving each way. And during the week, the moms and children would stay put. So the second similarity is along social lines. Before World War I, ethnic neighbors didn't mix. So New York was like strips of ribbon from north to south in the lower part of Manhattan, from the Hudson River all the way east to the East River. And in these strips were different ethnic groups and tenement buildings. And they, as I alluded to before, they spoke different languages, they practiced different religions, but they lived exactly the same. They were all coming from extreme poverty and abuse, and they were looking to get safety, employment, education, and for their children. But they didn't really mix. They were superstitious, they didn't trust each other. And when World War I came about, there was a tremendous sense of patriotism amongst all these immigrants, and they enlisted. But General Pershing, who oversaw the military, had to teach them all English and get them to work as a cohesive unit. And so he did something very clever. He set up these training camps, but he wouldn't let anyone bunk together who spoke the same language, or had, like, the Italian boys were in with the Jewish boys, were in with the Greek boys, and they had to commonly figure out how to communicate with the little English they had. And in their training, they had to learn to trust each other, to watch each other's backs. And so by the time they got on the ships to go over to France, they were really getting there. And I dug up a letter from from the War Department, from an Italian boy who was in a hospital bed, sent to his mother down on Mott Street, and telling her that he was okay, that he had been shot in the leg, but he was going to heal. He wasn't going to lose his leg. And he tells her the story of what happened. And what happened was that they were advancing out of the foxholes, and he found himself shot, and he looked up, and there was a German soldier with a bayonet about to spear him. And then all of a sudden, the German soldier falls over to the side. He looks to see where the gunshot came from, And it was his friend Murray from the
Wow.
from the barracks. And he's writing to his mom, and he said, you know, you never would let me go over to the Lower East Side because you thought they'd rob us blind. They thought if they went to the Italian area, we'd kill them. And this guy saved my life. And now he's more of a brother than my own brothers. And the importance of that story is that multiply that by thousands. And all of these men are coming back to America, and they're friends. They're trusting each other. They're veterans, and they're in a world that's hitting the 1920s. There's some money. There's jobs. They set up businesses together. They move out of the city. They go onto Long Island. They go to New Jersey. They are living in the same neighborhoods. Their kids are going to public school together. And all of a sudden, this melting pot has legs.
Ooh.
And it's like a very integrated, probably really the beginning of taking the best of everybody and mixing it to the American life, the American dream. So how does that tie into now? Well, now it's feeling a little bit like before World War I, when there's a lot of divisions, a lot of stereotyping, a lot of misconceptions about who we are and what we believe and who you can trust, and forgetting that underneath all of it, all that packaging, we're just humans.
Yeah.
And my background in healthcare, I already knew that, because underneath the skin, we're all the same. And when people are suffering and they're scared, we're all the same. And working in hospitals, it really removes a lot of the stereotyping. But what percent of the population works in hospitals? So for everybody else out there, I hope that my books open your eyes and reminds us how similar we all are.
Well, Jane, how did the anti-Semitism, yeah, and hate groups shape this story?
Well, that was really coming from the KKK. And I think, my characters, many of them went to France, and they came back and they thought the world would have changed. And instead, they're now encountering these hate groups, or this anti-Semitic, anything that wasn't kind of white farmers. And so I just think that for some of them, they were like head scratching, like, where did this come from? But for some others, they were angry. And some of my characters are angry, and they're reminding these individuals who they cross paths with in town, look, we're not like, it's not like the South, where you're going after emancipated slaves who were under oppression for their entire lives generationally. You're going after people who know how to shoot machine guns and have just gotten off the battlefields a few years ago. You have no idea what you're up against. And so the story starts getting more and more charged with the anger back at the KKK folks, who my characters feel are ignorant and dangerous at the same time, and they really won't tolerate it.
So during your research for the Ku Clan, and what did you learn that surprised you?
Well, I was surprised they were there. I couldn't figure out why they came north, but they did. And they were also in southern New Jersey, and they were all through the area. And I just found it so interesting that people would want to join up with a group that was just hell-bent on hurting people. It just, that side of human nature just leaves me dazed. And so, like most things that confuse me, I like to pick it apart and figure out how to write about it. Well, the new book I'm working on has a serial killer, if that makes you feel any better.
I just had a serial killer guest on that wrote about Charles Manson and a bunch of other serial killers. That was interesting because I've always wanted to understand the mind of a serial killer. So the next book that you have coming out, is it based on a real serial killer or?
Based on a real serial killer. It's based a little bit, it's a fictional autobiographic book, but it's more autobiographical in that the main character is like the inside of me, how I would have dealt with situations. But the situations she finds herself in were not my situations. So I don't have a working title for it. Right now it's maybe Kismet. But I skip over World War II. And this book starts in the 1960s, which were really my formative years, the late 60s and 70s, and my college years. And so it actually starts at Grossberger's. But there is a serial killer who was active in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where I went to college, and he was caught and tried before I ever got there in 1971. But he was picking up co-eds between Eastern Michigan University and University of Michigan and killing these girls. And I didn't know, thank God my father didn't know, or he never would have let me leave New Jersey and go that far away to school. I mean, it was after Kent State. It's like, you know, my father went to college, but he was like the first one in his generation. So for me to go away to school was a very big deal. But I was writing the book, and it just wasn't taking off the way books take off in my experience. So I went back to the beginning and I started looking at all the history. And when I got to the serial killer, he was called the Michigan Murderer. I decided he's not getting caught, not so fast. He's going to be in my story. And so that part of the story becomes fictional. And it led me to research a lot about serial killers. And, you know, like many other things, and I always compare things medically and sometimes to cancer because I learned a lot about it. And cells that becomes cancerous usually just don't happen overnight.
Yeah.
It's always a series of things, the body aging, external chemicals, genetics. Well, so serial killers are much like that. They may have difficult childhoods. There may be a gene, but that alone won't make a person snap. It has to be.
Well, that's the thing, right? A lot of people think people are snapping when they become a serial killer.
Well,
but
they
do you think it's like a brain, like, you know, like a dog, a Dalmatian, not a Dalmatian, but there's a dog, I'm trying to think of the name, and its brain, as it gets older, it shrinks the brain, right, and tightens the brain, and then the dog snaps. It's a black dog, I can't remember the name of it. And the brain just snaps.
A Doberman?
Oh, maybe a Doberman.
Well, the thing is with serial killers, the Vietnam War was a big part of the backdrop of my generation. And war sometimes is that final ingredient that can turn a person into a killer when he comes home, because it's the first time that we have checks and balances, and we supposedly do in wartime, but you have permission to kill. And Vietnam got crazy. I mean, there were all sorts of violations of war codes of conduct, and some of these soldiers really went pretty nuts. And so my character, that's his case. That caused him to turn. So he comes back after the war and tries to hide in the college campus world, and he's not happy unless he's killing women.
So Jane, in your 4 books, why is it important for you to have a
You're cutting out, Liz. Why is it important for me to why is it important? Why is it important for me to do what?
Why is resilience such a strong theme throughout all of your books?
Resilience is definitely a strong theme. I think that life is full of adversity, even the best lives. Nobody gets off scot-free. And I think the people who are the happiest, who fare the best, are people who are resilient. I think that is probably more important than intelligence, is being able to take in the rough stuff and still function, to still have a quality of life. And so I want my protagonists, my main characters are mostly women, but they had plenty of things stacked against them with the times they lived in and the circumstances of the story. But I wanted them to be problem solvers. I wanted them to forge ahead, take care of themselves, their families, the people they loved. And I really believe that throughout history, there were many, many women like that who are just invisible characters. And a lot of historical fiction writers like to take a famous person or a person who should have been famous because she did great things and construct a story around that character. So they're teaching the reader a little bit of history about that character. On the opposite end, I like to look at the ordinary woman, the woman who just didn't want to make spaghetti and meatballs for dinner, or brisket, or whatever, or baklava. You know, the woman who wanted to break out of the expectations of the time and do something different. And because I think that we never would have gotten the vote had it not been for the thousands and thousands of women just like that, who just are buried namelessly in history. But it wasn't only Susan B. Anthony who drove the process. She led the process, and other suffragette leaders came behind her. But it was people like us who made it happen. And so I like to put the microscope on the ordinary.
I like that because, it's the ordinary that doesn't get seen and heard. But through the stories that you write, they do get seen and heard.
Mm-hmm. And they count, and that's true today too. I mean, I'm not a writer whose work will be pulled out in 100 years saying, Jane Rubin told the plight of the women from mid-century 1800s through the beginning of 1900s. But I will have impacted enough people in my own right to maybe make a little bit of difference. Yeah. And that's an ordinary person who just has an interest in doing something a little different during my retirement years.
So Jane, what historical era fascinates you the most? Is it the 1800s?
I think the 1900s.
The 1900s?
Yeah, I was really curious at looking at the history that was not so notable, like the period of the late 1800s after the Civil War was over through into the First World War. And so much stuff happened. Then the immigration, the Industrial Revolution. I mean, there was like a booming amount of scientific discovery. But when you get into the 20th century, you really see this acceleration of knowledge as you get from the beginning to the end. And I think we're going to see that geometric growth again from the beginning of the 21st century to the end. I mean, even in the book world, and I don't have these statistics 100% off the cuff, but for the whole century of the 1900s, there were something like 2 million books published. But there's almost that amount published a year now, in a year. I mean, that's like 300-fold increase. And that's self-publishing, that's everything. And so there's this, you see this geometric explosion in medical innovation. I mean, look at me. I'm like a 1% survival rate, and I have had all these new drugs, and I think I look pretty good for 72.
Oh my goodness, I would have never gave you 72, girl.
I mean, you know, maybe better on the outside than the inside, but I mean, they've kept me going. And I just think that it's just really interesting. It's going to keep getting really interesting fast. And I think fast will be the key word if we don't have another world war.
And Jane, what do you want the readers to take away from the novels?
Well, I think the overriding thing that I think is most important is, especially in a somewhat polarized world that we live in today, is that we share history accurately, and that whether we like the history or not, or whether it makes us look good or terrible, we look at it honestly and we learn from it. So, like in the hands of women were so vulnerable sexually. They were so vulnerable physically. Families were enormous. They had no way to control the size of their family and have a happy marriage. And they couldn't afford these children, and it led people to make very dangerous decisions. And I don't want to do that again. I don't want to, I think we should learn from that. We should find solutions to that people can live with. And I don't think anybody really knows my personal views on these topics, but I could surprise you with them as a grandmother of 7. Life is very precious. I think that we should be always aware of that, and give people the tools so that we can protect life and that we can protect our destiny with it. So I think history is very informative. And I think that a lot of people look back and they kind of make it up. They don't really know. And have I been guilty of that? I might have been too, but I'm not anymore. I research. If I don't know what I'm talking about, I check my facts.
I think that's important, especially when you're telling a story about the history, right? You want the facts. You don't want to have the gossip or the rumor or the hairdresser who heard this rumor that person was with that person. And we were talking about this the other night, me and Alan, when he came on and talked about Charles Manson, and him as well. When he's writing his books, he said, I want the facts, Liz. I want the source. I don't want the latest gossip in the town. Because when you're bringing these stories to the table, you want people to learn from them, not make their own stories or create their own dilemma of what has happened.
Well, we have this social media that is a two-edged sword. It's very entertaining. You can get real news fast. You can get make-believe news fast. You can get opinions quickly, and how to sort it out and know what to believe is very, very difficult. Aside from the fact that it's sort of polluting our children's heads, which is a whole nother matter.
Absolutely. Well, that goes into the next question I have for you is, what message would you leave for future generations with your books?
I think that it's really important to see the common denominators across our population. And we are one people, and we come in all different shapes and colors and forms and beliefs. But I think that teaching children and adults to respect and seek to understand each other. For example, there is a passage in this book where one of the KKK men there's a medical issue, and he has to turn to people he never would trust. And his wife, who's kind of on the outside of it, is feeling very regretful. And she says to Miriam, the nurse from over there, she says to her, well, you know, you can understand. I mean, these people are newcomers. It's natural not to want to, you know, to protect our own. And Miriam says, do you believe in the Bible? And the woman's like, oh, of course. And Miriam cites a passage from the Bible about welcoming strangers. And she said, well, what about that? I mean, I don't think it's normal to hate new people. I think it's normal to be curious. Yeah. I think it's normal to open your door and welcome them and get to know them and get to know your neighbor. But no, to go after them and threaten and burn their homes, no, that's not normal. Yeah. And that's the kind of level of conversation that I feel needs to come from the books, from all of them, is where are our hearts? You know, is it normal to corner a Jewish kid on a university campus just because he's Jewish? And he now represents atrocities in Gaza? I mean, what kind of thinkers are these people? You know, it's and that's the stuff. God, if I live long enough to see a little more harmonious behavior amongst different sorts of people, I'll feel very satisfied.
So, Jane, what final message would you like to leave with everybody tonight?
Read my books. I have a new one coming out. They're a lot of work. You know, my granddaughter said when she was helping me sell books, the one in high school, and she said to somebody who was buying books, you know, my grandmother spent a lot of hours writing this book. And, you know, it's like from the mouths of babes. So I would hope people enjoy them. They're relatively easy reads. You know, I don't write like way up here. I write for the common person, and yet I try and write meaningful literature so that you learn, you think, maybe you debate, which is fine too, but you come out with a bigger brain. And I also couple of just infomercial things. I have the three books before Mayhem. Whoops. Oh, that's over there, down there. It's really over there. They're on sale in Kindle. And I put them on sale. So for those people who want to kind of catch up on the early books, easy peasy. And I have the normal low price for Mayhem. It's coming out in a little over a week. There's pre-orders now for both Kindle and for the soft cover. There's no hardcover. This is the hardcover. And I'm just hoping that people enjoy it. You know, it's summer. We should all be reading.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, you know, it's important to tell people. It's important to leave reviews. It's important to, you know, that's actually how In the Hands of Women took off, word of mouth. This book has sold so many copies, and I haven't spent a lot of money on advertising. And I think it's word of mouth. Ann Patchett There's a TikTok on social media where she says that's the most effective way to sell books is to share a good story with someone else.
Absolutely. Well, Jane, thank you so much for joining me on Tea Time again. It was a pleasure to have you back and have my viewers listen to your new books and all of the 4 books. We were able to get into all of them tonight a little bit and get into the next one. So stay tuned because Jane has a new one coming.
All right. Thanks, Liz. And you be well.
Just like to spell. Oh, are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Yeah. If you'd just like to spell out your website for the listeners, and then I'll do a wrap up of tonight's Tea Time.
What do you want me to do about my website?
Just spell it out.
Okay. www.janeloeb, L-O-E-B, Rubin, RUBIN.com.
Thank you, guys. And thank you, Jane, for coming again. A quick wrap up of tonight's Tea Time. What a rich and meaningful conversation tonight. Jane, thank you for once again bringing your heart, insight, and extraordinary storytelling to the Tea Time table. Your ability to weave history and emotional depth allows readers not only to learn about the past, but to truly feel it. Today's conversation reminded us that historical fiction has the power to preserve voices, uncover forgotten truths, and help us better understand both humanity and ourselves. Through Mayhem in the Mountains, you explored themes of fear, survival, family, prejudice, courage, and resilience during one of America's most complicated periods. Yet beyond the historical backdrop, your work reminds us of something deeper, deeply human. People have always searched for safety, belonging, hope, and connection in uncertain times. One of the strongest takeaways from tonight's Tea Time is this: history matters because people matter. When we take time to listen to stories from the past, we gain perspective, empathy, and awareness that we can shape how we move towards together. Here's some food for thought to leave with everyone today. What stories from the past still hold lessons we have not fully learned yet? Because remembering is not about staying trapped in history. It is about honoring truth while building a wiser future. Thank you, Jane, for continuing to preserve important stories through your writing and for returning to share your voice once again with the Tea Time community. Until our next time, keep sharing stories that matter, keep honoring history with heart, and keep serving real life tea one conversation at a time. And I'll see everybody in June, and we'll do this all over again.